They humiliated me. But my grandson refused to stay silent. What he did changed everything. I still remember the moment as if it were carved into stone. The words didn't just float through the air. They struck me like daggers, sharp and deliberate. I was sitting in my chair by the window, the same chair where I had spent years watching the world pass by, trying to convince myself I was still part of it. My hands were folded neatly in my lap, and I was pretending to focus on the birds outside. When the voices carried from the kitchen started with Rachel, my daughter-in-law. Her tone was dismissive, laced with irritation that she no longer bothered to hide. "She just sits there," she said. "She doesn't help. She doesn't do anything. We have to take care of her like she's a child." Each word pierced me deeper than the last. I wanted to believe I had misheard her, that perhaps fatigue or frustration had twisted her voice. But then came Michael, my own son, the boy I had once cradled. In my arms, the boy I had raised through sleepless nights and endless sacrifices. His voice was steady, almost cold. "It's not fair. She's living here, eating, sleeping, doing nothing. It's become useless." That word, useless. It echoed in my chest like a bell tolling for the dead. My heart pounded as if trying to escape, as if it wanted to protest when my lips would not move. My eyes stung, but no tears fell. I sat frozen, a prisoner in my own body, unable to interrupt, unable to defend myself. I thought that was the worst of it until I heard the sound that cut deeper than any words. My granddaughter's laugh. "Maybe we should just put her in one of those homes," she said, amusement dripping from her voice. "At least there she won't be our problem." My breath caught in my throat. In that instant, I wasn't a mother. I wasn't a grandmother. I wasn't even human. I was a burden, an inconvenience, a weight they were eager to cast aside. And the cruelty of it all was that they didn't even try to whisper. They said it like truth, like fact, as though I were deaf, as though my presence had dissolved into the walls. I clenched the arms of the chair, my nails digging into the worn fabric. I wanted to stand up, to walk into that kitchen and scream until my voice shattered their lies. But my body betrayed me. I stayed there, rigid and silent, my heart collapsing in on itself. I felt heavy, heavier than I had in years, like the word useless had chained itself around my chest. But what none of them realized, what they didn't know, was that someone else had been listening to. My grandson, barely 17, but with eyes sharper than any blade, with a heart stronger than all of theirs combined. He walked into the room, and in that single look, I knew he had heard everything. The anger in his eyes wasn't the fleeting rage of youth. It was something deeper, steadier, the kind of fire that refuses to die out. And in that moment, my silence met his strength. If this story already grips your heart, please like this video and subscribe. Every gesture of support helps carry these stories to others who feel unseen, who need to know they are not alone. He walked closer, knelt before me, and took my hand. His palm was warm, steady, grounding me back into myself. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling with both fury and love, "you are not useless. You raised my dad. You built this family. You gave everything. If they can't see that, then they don't deserve you." The boy who once ran to me with scraped knees was now standing for me when no one else would. In that instant, something shifted inside me. A truth I had long buried rose to the surface. I was not invisible. I was not done. And though my own children had dismissed me, the one they thought too young to understand was the only one who truly saw me. Now, I want to ask you something from the deepest part of my soul. Have you ever lived a moment where someone's courage gave you back your strength? Where? Their stand transformed your life when you thought it was over. Tell me in the comments below, because sometimes the smallest act of defiance becomes the spark that changes everything. This house once carried my laughter, my cooking, my presence. It carried my very soul in its walls. I had poured myself into every corner of it, every room, every memory stitched together like a quilt of decades. There was a time when the sound of my voice filled these spaces with certainty, when the smell of my food wrapped everyone in comfort, when the rhythm of my steps meant things were under control. I was the one who decided what was for dinner, who set the table, who made sure bills were paid, and the noise never grew louder than the peace inside these walls. This house was more than bricks and paint. 'Twas an extension of me, a reflection of the life I had built with my hands, my heart, and my sacrifices. But slowly, day by day, moment by moment, it became a stranger to me. The walls that once echoed my voice began to swallow it. The air that once felt warm and alive grew cold and distant. And I, once the center of this home, began to feel like nothing more than furniture gathering dust in the corner. It began with small things. Things so subtle I almost convinced myself I was imagining them. The meals, for example. There was a time when family dinners were sacred, when my pies were the centerpiece of Sundays, when I carefully set plates for everyone and watched their faces light up with the first bite. But now I would walk into the kitchen and see dinner already served, plates already filled, laughter already shared, and no plate waiting for me. I would stand there quietly, as if I had stumbled into a gathering where I wasn't invited. My stomach would tighten, not from hunger, but from the realization that I was no longer part of the circle. They had planned it, prepared it, shared it. Without me, I wasn't forgotten. I was ignored. And that is a pain sharper than memory. Loss evenings were the hardest. I could hear laughter spilling from the living room, movies playing, conversations bouncing like joy itself was dancing across the floor. But when I opened my door, no one called out to me. No one said, "Grandma, come sit with us." I would step into the hallway, hesitate, and then quietly retreat back to my chair. Staring at the walls, feeling the vibration of a family gathering without me. It's a special kind of cruelty to live inside a house that should be your sanctuary but feels like a stage you're no longer allowed to stand on. My daughter-in-law was the first to change. At first she used to be sweet, kind even. She would bring me tea, call me mom, and sit to talk about her day. But those days faded like photographs left too long in the sun. Soon her kindness turned to sighs, her patience into irritation. If I asked a question, she corrected me mid-sentence, as if I were a child who had spoken out of turn. If I forgot something, she would roll her eyes, and my granddaughter would giggle under her breath. It wasn't loud mockery, but quiet enough to slice into me like a razor hidden under silk. And my son, my own blood, he stayed silent. Silence can be louder than cruelty. His refusal to defend me was its own betrayal, one I felt deep in my bones. The house itself began to feel smaller. Not because the walls had moved, but because my space inside it was shrinking. I was no longer in the kitchen, no longer at the table, no longer part of the evenings filled with noise. I was confined to my chair by the window, the cushion molded to my body, the fabric thinning under the weight of my stillness. That chair became my prison, the only place where I was allowed to exist. I used to decorate this home, keep it alive, breathe energy into it. Now, my presence felt like clutter, something they had to step around. Sometimes I would try to participate, to add something to the conversation. I would ask about their day, about school, about work. But my questions floated unanswered, or worse, were brushed aside with curt replies. My daughter-in-law would correct my words, turning me into a student in my own home. My granddaughter would laugh, not maliciously, but carelessly, like my mistakes were entertainment. And my son would simply keep eating, his silence louder than any insult. I began to notice how they spoke around me, not to me. They would talk about schedules, finances, plans, things I used to handle with precision. never once include me. Sometimes I would enter a room and their conversation would stop. Or worse, continue as though I weren't there at all, as though I were a shadow drifting past the edges of their vision. I had become invisible. And there is no wound greater than being alive and unseen. Nights stretched long. I would lie in bed listening to the hum of the television, the bursts of laughter, the rhythm of a family sharing life while I lay in silence. I remembered a time when I was the one who gathered everyone together, who created that laughter, who held that rhythm. Now I lay there wondering if they even remembered who I once was. Did my son remember the nights I stayed awake with him through fevers? Did my granddaughter remember the stories I used to tell her at bedtime, the ones that made her eyes sparkle? Or had they erased those memories along with me? The transformation of my place in this house didn't happen overnight. That's what made it unbearable. It was slow, creeping, like a candle burning down until there was nothing left but smoke. I wasn't thrown out. I wasn't shouted at. Instead, I was quietly erased, layer by layer, until I was no longer needed, no longer respected, no longer part of the home I had once defined. The hardest part was realizing that I had been the glue, and once they no longer wanted the bond, they no longer needed me. I would sit by the window, staring at the garden Richard and I had planted together years ago. The roses we had chosen, the tree we had nurtured, the bench where we once sat holding hands. All of it still there, still living, still growing, but without me. The garden didn't need me anymore, neither did they. And as I watched, I realized the cruelest truth. I wasn't living in my house anymore. I was surviving in theirs. Tell me in the comments, have you ever felt like you gave everything to a place, to people, to a life, only to realize you had become invisible in it? Because sometimes the greatest pain isn't losing your home, it's realizing your home has lost you. I wasn't supposed to hear it. Maybe they thought my steps were too slow, my hearing too weak, my presence too faint to matter. But that night, as I moved down the hallway to fetch the glasses I had left in the living room, I froze at the sound of voices carrying from the kitchen. I stood still, my hand resting against the wall, my breath caught in my chest. And then I heard her. Rachel, my daughter-in-law. Her words sharper than knives hidden behind a smile. She's taking up space. We can't keep doing this, Michael. It's time we think about a nursing home. Somewhere far, somewhere permanent. My heart stumbled. My knees weakened. I pressed my palm harder against the wall, praying it would hold me up. A nursing home. Far permanent. The words wrapped around me like chains. And then I heard my son's voice, low, uncertain, but still betraying me in its weakness. But it's her house. It's still in her name. For a moment, I clung to that, my name, my right, my identity, tied to the very bricks of this place. But Rachel's tone cut through his hesitation. She doesn't have to agree. We'll talk to Dr. Simmons. A few reports, a few missed words, and it's done. It's not hard to convince people she's not capable anymore. Not capable. That phrase slammed into me harder than any insult I had ever endured. Not capable? After decades of running this family, after raising my son into the man who now sat there quietly as his wife plotted against me. Not capable. After managing every bill, every crisis, every heartbreak that had shaped this home. My breath grew shallow. My fingers trembled against the wall, as if even my body was reacting to the cruelty of the lie they were already preparing to tell. And then, a sound I will never forget. Laughter. My granddaughter's laugh, young and sharp, cutting through the air with cruelty disguised as amusement. Useless old people don't need big houses, she said. Let her take her knitting to a room with a view and call it retirement. I nearly collapsed where I stood. That laugh, that voice I had once soothed with bedtime stories and comforted with my arms after nightmares, now mocking the life I had built. The betrayal sat heavy in my chest, pressing so hard I thought my ribs would crack. I staggered back into my room, my vision blurred. the hallways spinning. I sank onto the edge of my bed, staring at the familiar carpet beneath my feet. The voices from the kitchen kept echoing inside my skull, looping over and over. Sell the house. Put her away. Not capable, useless. They weren't words spoken in anger, but in cold planning, in calculation, as if I were an obstacle, not a human being. They were plotting not just my future, but my disappearance. Do you know what it feels like to become invisible to the very people you gave life to? To hear your existence weighed and measured like a financial problem to be solved. It's not anger that hits first. Disbelief, the kind that makes your body tremble, your breath stutter, your heart ache with a wound deeper than any physical pain. I thought of the nights I stayed awake with my son when he was sick, the mornings I rose early to make sure he had breakfast before school, the sacrifices Richard and I made so that Michael could grow into a man with choices. And now here he was, listening to his wife plot my removal, his daughter mocking me, and he did nothing. Silence. That silence screamed louder than anything. I wanted to march into the kitchen, to slam my hand on the table and demand to be seen, demand to be respected. But I couldn't move. I couldn't bear the thought of looking into their faces and seeing no regret, no shame, just cold conviction. So I sat in my room, gripping the edge of the bed, the sound of their voices still twisting inside my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt smaller than the house I had once ruled. But then came the softest knock. Gentle, hesitant, almost afraid. "Grandma," a voice whispered. "Jake, my youngest grandson, 14 years old." He stepped inside quietly, his eyes wide with a fire I hadn't seen in anyone else in that house. "I heard them," he said, his voice trembling. "I didn't mean to, but I heard everything." I looked at him, and for a moment I felt seen again. His small frame carried a strength far greater than the adults who had abandoned me. "They can't do that to you," he said firmly. "This is your home. You're not going anywhere." I didn't answer. My lips trembled, my throat too tight to form words. But Jake's presence, his certainty, began to fill the space that had been emptied by betrayal. He didn't offer solutions. He didn't pretend to have the power to fix it all. He simply stood there, eyes blazing, holding my hand with a grip steadier than any promise. And in that moment, I understood something I had forgotten. I was not entirely alone. Even in the face of betrayal, even when my own children erased me, there was still one voice willing to rise above the silence. Tell me in the comments, have you ever discovered the truth about what people say when they think you're not listening? It's words that shattered your image of them forever. Because sometimes the cruelest whispers expose the deepest truths. And the question that remains is whether we let those truths destroy us or awaken the fire inside us. I will never forget the way he walked into my room that night. The door creaked softly, and for a second, I thought it would be my son, maybe even Rachel, coming in to justify themselves or pretend that I had misheard. But it wasn't them. It was Jake, my youngest grandson. He's 14 years old, still with that boyish awkwardness, school books tucked under his arm, hair falling across his forehead. But in his eyes, there was something I had not seen in years inside this house. Fire, not the reckless, impulsive fire of youth, but a steady blaze that comes from knowing right from wrong, from feeling injustice burn deep enough that silence is no longer an option. He stood there for a moment, just looking at me, his lips pressed together, his chest rising and falling as though he was holding back words too heavy for his age. Then, without hesitation, he crossed the room and knelt down in front of me. His hands reached for mine, and as his small, warm palms wrapped around my frail fingers, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: connection. Real, unshakable connection. "Grandma," he said, his voice trembling with anger and tenderness at the same time. "I heard them. I heard everything. They're wrong." His eyes locked onto mine, refusing to let me look away. refusing to let me hide in the silence I had built around myself. You are not useless. You raised Dad. You built this house. You carried this family on your back. You gave everything. And if they can't see that, then they don't deserve you. The words poured into me like water into cracked, dry earth. My chest ached with the weight of them, because I knew they came from a place pure and uncorrupted. He wasn't trying to flatter me. He wasn't repeating something he had heard from an adult. These were his own convictions, born out of the injustice he had just witnessed. My eyes stung, not from shame this time, but from a strange, overwhelming gratitude that this boy, this child, saw me in a way no one else did. I studied his face. The boy who used to run to me with scraped knees, begging for comfort. The boy I had once carried on my hip, singing lullabies when he couldn't sleep. Now he was the one kneeling before me, offering comfort I hadn't even realized I was desperate for. In that moment, the roles shifted. He was no longer the child in need of protection. He was the protector. And the woman who had once been the foundation of this family, was the one being held together by his strength. "Don't let their words break you," he whispered. "They don't know what they're saying. They don't remember everything you did for them, but I do. I remember." His voice cracked on that last sentence. And I saw the boy inside him again, the child who still needed me, even as he was saving me. I squeezed his hand, though my grip was weak. I wanted to tell him everything, how much his words meant. How his courage was giving me back a piece of myself I thought I had lost forever. But all I could do was look at him, my lips trembling, my voice stuck in the storm of emotions swirling. Inside me, he seemed to understand anyway. He always had a way of understanding without me saying a word. The truth is, I had been waiting for anyone to notice me, to defend me, to see me. I had been waiting for years, shrinking into the background, hoping my sacrifices would be acknowledged, hoping my love would be remembered. But it wasn't my son, the man I had given life to, who rose to the occasion. It wasn't my daughter-in-law, who once called me mom with sweetness that had since curdled into disdain. It wasn't my granddaughter, the girl I had spoiled with stories and gifts, who once slipped little notes of love into my knitting bag. No, it was Jake, the one they underestimated, the one they overlooked, the one they thought too young to matter. He was the one who mattered most. And that realization lit something inside me. For so long I had believed that my value was determined by those around me, that if they stopped seeing me, I stopped existing. But Jake shattered that lie in a single moment. His conviction, his refusal to stay silent, reminded me that I was still here, still alive, still worthy of love and respect. His fire became my fire. His belief became the seed of my own awakening. He didn't let go of my hand that night. He sat beside me, still in his school clothes, the smell of paper and pencil lingering faintly. He didn't try to distract me or pretend it hadn't happened. He let the silence stretch, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence I had grown used to. It was steady, healing, the kind of silence that says, "I am here, and I am not going anywhere." For the first time in a long time, I felt something shift inside me. I wasn't just a burden. I wasn't just background noise. I wasn't just furniture in a house that had once been mine. I was a grandmother, a matriarch, a woman who had built something with her life. And though my son and his family tried to erase me, the proof of my worth was sitting right there, holding my hand, reminding me that sometimes the youngest voice carries the loudest truth. Now, I want to know something from you. Have you ever been defended by someone you least expected? Someone whose courage gave you back a piece of yourself you thought you had lost? Share it in the comments, because sometimes it's in those unexpected moments of loyalty that we rediscover our true value. The days that followed could have broken me completely, but they didn't because Jake never left me to face the silence alone. It's strange how life works. For months I had sat in that chair by the window, invisible, erased by the people I thought would carry me in my final years. And then, from the most unexpected place, came the proof that I still mattered. He didn't arrive with grand speeches or dramatic gestures. He arrived quietly, with small acts that grew into something larger than anything I had ever imagined. The first night, after that cruel conversation I overheard, I couldn't eat. The weight of betrayal sat in my stomach like a stone. I went to bed without dinner, my body too heavy to rise, my heart too broken to even pretend. But around 9 o'clock there was that gentle knock, 3 soft taps. When I opened the door, Jake stood there holding a plate. A simple sandwich, wrapped in a napkin, and a small bottle of apple juice. "You skipped dinner," he said softly, almost embarrassed. His eyes darted toward the hallway, making sure no one was watching. He placed the food on my nightstand and whispered, "Don't tell Mom." Then he smiled. Not the forced smile of someone trying to cheer me up, but the genuine grin of a boy who wanted me to feel seen. I didn't even realize I was smiling back until my cheeks ached. It wasn't the sandwich that fed me that night, it was the act itself. The quiet acknowledgement that I still deserved care, that someone noticed me. The next night, he came again. This time with 2 cookies tucked inside a paper towel. "I know she doesn't like sweets after dinner," he said, rolling his eyes in mock rebellion. "But I figured you wouldn't tell on me." He placed them in my hand and I laughed, a sound I hadn't heard from myself in so long that it startled me. That laugh, that small release, reminded me I was still alive. That joy could still reach me even in the darkest corners. Soon it became routine. Every evening, around the same time, I would hear that knock. Sometimes he brought food, sometimes just a blanket or a joke he had read. Online, one night he showed me a silly meme on his phone, and I laughed until tears blurred my eyes. But it wasn't the jokes or the cookies or even the food that mattered. It was the message behind it all. You are not invisible to me. You still matter. Then one evening he came in with something different. His hands shook slightly as he pulled his phone from his pocket. "I need to show you this," he said. He pressed play, and I heard it, the cruel laughter of Rachel, the dismissive tone of Michael, the sharp voice of Emily. "She can't even follow a TV show anymore," Rachel mocked. "How is she supposed to handle finances?" Then Michael's voice followed, cold and dismissive. "We'll say it's for her own good. She's lucky we're even planning anything." My heart shattered all over again. Not because I hadn't heard those words before, but because now they were captured, undeniable, permanent. Jake's hands trembled as he held the phone toward me. "I've been recording them," he confessed. For weeks, I knew something was wrong. I didn't know how bad, but I couldn't stay silent anymore. I looked at him, tears filling my eyes. I touched his cheek with my frail hand. "You don't have to carry this," I whispered. His jaw tightened. "Yes, I do," he said, "because you carried all of us for years. You carried Dad. You carried this house. You carried me. It's my turn." The weight of his words hit me harder than the cruelty of the others. My own children had forgotten, erased, dismissed. But this boy remembered. He saw me not as a burden, but as the backbone of a family that had lost its memory. And in his fire, I felt my own flicker back to life. Over the following days, Jake's defiance grew stronger. He began sitting with me more often, asking about my past, about Grandpa, about the stories no one else cared to hear anymore. "You should write this down," he told me once. "It's history. Your history. And it matters." His words weren't just kind, they were truth. They were proof that my life, my memories, my sacrifices had value. And for the first time in a long time, I began to believe it again. Sometimes he grew angry. "Why do they treat you like this?" he demanded. They should be grateful. His fists would clench, his jaw set, his voice rising with a passion too raw for his age. I didn't know how to answer him. I didn't have the strength to explain the cruelty of people who rewrite your worth when you're no longer useful to them. But I didn't need to. Answer: Jake wasn't asking for explanations. He was declaring his refusal to accept their version of me. And then came the dinner table. Rachel snapped at me for forgetting where the serving spoon was. Michael stayed silent. Emily smirked. But Jake slammed his hand against the table, his voice cutting through the room. "She's not invisible," he said. "She's not broken. She's the strongest person here. And you all know it." His words hung in the air like thunder. For the first time, no one laughed. No one rolled their eyes. For the first time, their silence wasn't dismissal, it was defeat. Jake looked at me then, and in his eyes, I saw something I had forgotten I could feel. Pride. Pride not in myself, but reflected back at me through him. It was as if he was holding up a mirror, reminding me of who I had always been, even when everyone else tried to erase it. Now I want to turn to you. Tell me in the comments where you're watching this video from. It warms my heart to know how far these stories can travel, how many lives they can touch. 'Cause sometimes it's in the smallest acts, the quietest moments, that we find the courage to rise again. I had lived too long in silence, too long convincing myself that endurance was strength. But the truth was harsher. Silence had become my prison. Every sigh from Rachel, every correction mid-sentence, every smirk from Emily, every silence from Michael, brick by brick, they built a wall around me, and I had allowed it. That night, as I lay in my bed, Jake's words echoing in my heart, I realized something I had been too afraid to admit. If I didn't act, if I didn't reclaim myself, I would vanish in the very house I once ruled. The choice wasn't easy. My hands trembled just thinking about it. My mind argued against me, whispering that I was too old, too tired, too powerless. But Jake's voice cut through those doubts. "It's your house, Grandma. It's your life. Don't let them take it." He didn't say it as advice. He said it as truth, as if it were undeniable, like the sun rising in the morning. And for the first time in years, I believed I still had choices to make. The first step was small, almost invisible. I pulled out an old notebook from my drawer, the same one I used to write recipes and grocery lists in. Instead of chores, I began writing names, dates, conversations, the things I had overheard, the words they thought I was too fragile to remember. My handwriting shook, but my resolve grew stronger with each word. I wasn't just recording events. I was reclaiming my story. Jake noticed the notebook one evening and smiled. "That's good," he said. "They can't erase what's written down." His confidence fueled me, gave me strength to keep going. Soon, it wasn't just notes. It was a plan. I started gathering documents, bills I had once managed, papers that still bore my signature, things Rachel had pushed aside as if I no longer had a right to them. I organized them carefully, methodically, the way I used to when running a household. My hands may have been weaker, but my mind was not gone. Every page, every record, every detail was proof that I was still capable. One morning, I looked at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back seemed older, yes, but not broken. Wrinkles framed my face, but behind them were decades of strength. My gray hair was pulled back neatly, my eyes lined with fatigue but still lit with determination. I whispered to my reflection, "You still have power." It wasn't loud, but it was enough. The day I left for the lawyer's office, I wore my best coat. Not for them, not to prove anything, but for me. Each button I fastened felt like armor. Each step I took toward the front door felt like reclaiming ground I had lost. Jake walked with me part of the way, his backpack slung over his shoulder, his eyes steady on mine. He didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He simply nodded, his silent way of saying, "I believe in you." At the office, I met with Mr. Grant, a lawyer older than Michael, patient in his demeanor, but sharp in his understanding. He listened as I explained, as I handed over the notebook, the documents, the evidence Jake had secretly recorded. His eyebrows rose slightly at the thoroughness. "You've done your homework," he said softly. I nodded, my voice steady for the first time in months. "I'm leaving everything to Jake. The house, the savings, the memories. He's the only one who stood for me when no one else did." He looked me in the eye. "Are you certain?" And I answered without hesitation. "More certain than I've ever been about anything." My hand didn't tremble when I signed the papers. My voice didn't crack when I recorded the video statement he suggested. Speaking directly into the camera, not as a victim, but as a woman reclaiming her truth. "If you're watching this," I said into the lens, "it means the truth can no longer be denied. I am not weak. I am not incapable. I have seen, I have heard, and I have chosen. What I built with love, I will leave with love." When I returned home, they didn't notice. Rachel scrolled on her phone. Michael asked what was for dinner. Emily complained about school. Only Jake's eyes met mine, steady and knowing. He didn't need words. We both understood that something monumental had shifted. The house might still feel heavy with their silence, but inside me, something had broken free. I was no longer waiting for them to validate me. I had chosen my own worth, written it down, signed it, sealed it, and that, more than anything else, was the choice that changed my life. Not the papers, not the documents, not even the lawyer's nod of approval. It was the moment I decided that no one, not even family, could define my worth but me. There are victories no one claps for. No trophies, no parades, no recognition. Just the quiet certainty that something inside you has shifted forever. That is the kind of victory I carried in silence. They didn't see it, and perhaps that was the sweetest part. For so long, they treated me like a shadow, a burden to be moved aside. A piece of furniture collecting dust in the corner of a house I had once built with my own hands. And yet, without raising my voice, without fighting in the way they expected, I reclaimed what was mine. I remember walking through the living room after that day at the lawyer's office. Rachel was curled on the couch, phone in hand, her laughter shallow and sharp. Michael barely looked up from the television. Emily sat scrolling endlessly, her face lit by the screen. None of them noticed the calmness in my step, the steady rhythm of my breath, the way my eyes no longer searched for their approval. They thought I was the same. They thought I was still erased. But deep inside, I carried the secret knowledge that the ground had shifted and they were standing on illusions. Jake, of course, noticed. He always noticed. Our eyes met across the room. He gave me the smallest nod. Nothing dramatic, just a flicker of acknowledgement, a silent agreement between us. He knew what I had done. He knew what I had chosen. And he knew that in my silence, I had one. At dinner, the familiar routine returned. Rachel corrected me when I asked a question. Emily smirked when I forgot a detail. Michael sat in silence. But something was different, not in them, but in me. Their words no longer pierced me. Their coldness no longer chained me. I ate slowly, deliberately, my back straight, my gaze steady. They didn't notice the shift, but Jake did. He leaned slightly closer, whispering so softly only I could hear, "You're stronger than all of them." And for the first time in years, I believed it. The days stretched on, but instead of being filled with dread, they were filled with quiet preparation. I began packing small things, photographs of Richard and me by the lake, the old cookbook with grease-stained pages, the scarf my mother knitted before she passed. Each item I placed in the bag was not just a belonging, but a piece of myself, carefully gathered for the life I was about to step into. The act of packing wasn't sadness. It was liberation. Every folded item whispered back at me, "You are choosing yourself." Jake helped me without asking questions. Sometimes he carried the boxes to my room. Sometimes he just sat beside me, listening as I told him the stories behind each item. "This scarf," I said, one evening, holding it close, "was made when I was younger than you. Every stitch carried love. That's what makes it last." He nodded, his eyes wide with reverence, as if he understood the weight of inheritance not measured in money, but in memory. One evening, as we sat together, he turned to me with that fire in his eyes again. "They don't deserve you," he said. "But I do, and I'll prove it." His voice cracked with the kind of determination only the young can carry, pure and unbroken by the compromises of adulthood. It wasn't a promise of grandeur. It was the truth of loyalty. And that moment, I knew he was right. The silent victory wasn't just in the papers signed or the will rewritten. It wasn't even in the house that would one day belong to him instead of the ones who tried to erase me. The victory was in the shift inside me, the moment I stopped waiting for recognition, stopped begging to be seen, stopped believing their words defined me. They thought I was powerless, but power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it sits quietly in a chair by the window, planning, preparing, rising in silence until the day it can no longer be denied. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to scream or demand apologies. The truth would come for them in its own time. What mattered was that I had chosen differently, that I had refused to let their lies bury me. The woman they called useless had signed her name with steady hands, had made choices with a clear mind, had proven that she was not erased, not forgotten, not broken. Jake became my anchor in those days. His presence reminded me that love doesn't always come from where you expect it. Sometimes it comes from the ones everyone underestimates, the ones dismissed as too young, too small, too quiet. But his courage was louder than the cruelty of all the others combined. And as I sat by the window, the evening sun spilling gold across the floor, I realized that my victory was not just mine, it was his too. Now, I want to speak directly to you. If this story has touched you, if you've felt the fire of injustice and the quiet strength of reclaiming your worth, then don't leave without subscribing to this channel. Every story we share here is a voice against silence, a reminder that dignity never expires. And tell me in the comments, have you ever felt the power of winning without anyone noticing? A victory so quiet, yet so undeniable, it changed everything. There are battles we fight that no one ever sees. They don't come with applause or recognition, only with quiet strength forged in silence, sharpened by years of being underestimated. I had lived long enough to learn that sometimes the deepest wounds don't come from strangers, but from those who share our blood, those we raised, those we believed would stand for us when our own body grew tired. Betrayal has a sound it isn't always loud. Sometimes it is whispered laughter in the kitchen. Sometimes it is silence at the dinner table. Sometimes it is the absence of your name in conversations that should have included you. And when you hear it, it carves through your chest like a blade. But life, in its strange way, never leaves us completely alone. Even in the darkest rooms, even in the heaviest silences, there is often one voice that refuses to stay quiet. For me, that voice was Jake, a boy too young in their eyes, but strong enough to remind me of who I had always been. He didn't rescue me with money or with power. He rescued me with recognition, with courage, with the kind of loyalty that cannot be taught. It is born in the soul. And through him, I remembered that strength is not about how loud you can shout. Sometimes, strength is measured by how steady you can stand when everyone else turns away. For years, I thought my worth was tied to how much I could give. Meals cooked, clothes folded, sacrifices made, all of it was proof of my love. And yet, when my hands trembled and my back bent, they told me I was useless, as if love had an expiration date. But Jake showed me something different. He showed me that my worth had never been in what I did, but in who I was. And once I saw that truth, the walls of silence they had built around me began to crack. I learned that victory does not always roar. Sometimes it is a woman signing her name on a paper no one thought she could understand. Sometimes it is packing a small bag filled with memories and leaving behind the weight of people who never valued them. Sometimes it is simply looking in the mirror and whispering, "You still have power." That is victory. Quiet, invisible, yet undeniable. And maybe that is the lesson my story carries, not just for me, but for you. Life will test your worth. People will try to rewrite it. It will call you useless, too old, too weak, too broken. But only you hold the pen. Only you decide what the next page says. Do not hand your story over to those who never cared to read it. Pick it up, write it. Even if your hand trembles, even if your voice shakes, write it anyway, because your silence is not there. Victory, your survival is. Now I turn to you, the one listening, the one who has walked with me through every word of this story. If you have felt invisible, if you have ever been underestimated, if you have carried the weight of betrayal inside your own home, know this: your story is not over. You still have choices to make. You still have victories waiting in silence. And sometimes the smallest decision, the quietest step, changes everything. If this story touched you, if it stirred something inside your heart, I ask you to subscribe. Each subscription, each like is not just support too, is a way to keep these voices alive, to remind the world that dignity does not fade with age and that love, when it is true, always finds its way back. And now, I want to leave you with a question that I hope you will answer in the comments. If you had one chance to reclaim your power, to make a choice that rewrote your story, what would it be? Share it with me, because your words might be the light someone else is waiting for.